Most people think they know Starry Night, a lonely genius, a troubled mind, a man staring out a window and painting what he saw. But almost everything about that story is wrong. The more closely historians, astronomers, art conservators, and Van Gogh scholars have examined this painting, the stranger it becomes. Because Starry Night is not simply a landscape. It may be one of the most personal spiritual statements ever painted, and perhaps one of the greatest visual mysteries in the history of art. When Vincent van Gogh painted Starry Night in June of 1889, he was living in an asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence in southern France. He had voluntarily committed himself after a series of mental health crises, including the infamous incident when he cut off his ear. At first glance, the painting appears to depict the view from his room. But there is a problem. The village below never existed. Researchers have confirmed that the little church steeple, the clustered houses, and much of the landscape were inventions. Van Gogh wasn't painting reality, he was constructing something, building something from memory, imagination, and symbolism. The question is, what and why? The answer may begin with a letter. Throughout his life, Vincent wrote hundreds of letters to his beloved brother, Theo van Gogh. These letters are among the most revealing documents ever left by an artist. In them, Vincent repeatedly speaks about subjects that modern audiences often overlook: faith, eternity, the soul, the possibility of life beyond death. Long before he became a painter, Vincent seriously considered becoming a minister. He studied religion, he preached, he immersed himself in scripture. Although his relationship with organized religion later became complicated, his fascination with spiritual questions never disappeared. And hidden inside Starry Night may be clues that those questions still consumed him. Look carefully at the sky. Not the stars, the movement. Everything appears alive. The heavens are not static, they twist, they swirl, they pulse with energy. More than a century later, scientists studying fluid dynamics noticed something astonishing. The patterns Van Gogh painted resemble mathematical descriptions of turbulence, complex energy flows found in nature. Some researchers have even suggested that his visual intuition captured aspects of these patterns decades before modern science formally described them. Whether coincidence or genius, it raises an extraordinary possibility. Van Gogh wasn't painting stars, he was painting movement itself, the invisible forces that animate the universe, as if the night sky were alive, breathing, turning, awake. And then there is the moon. Most artists would paint the moon as it appears. Van Gogh did not. He transformed it into a radiant orb of golden fire. It almost resembles a sun. Why? Some scholars believe Vincent was intentionally blurring the boundary between day and night, light and darkness, hope and suffering, life and death. In Starry Night, opposites seem to coexist. Nothing is fixed, everything is in transition. But perhaps the most intriguing mystery lies in the stars themselves. Count them. Many viewers notice 11 prominent stars. That number may be accidental, or it may point toward one of the most fascinating theories surrounding the painting. In the book of Genesis, Joseph recounts a dream. I saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down before me. Van Gogh knew the Bible extraordinarily well. Could this be a reference? Could the celestial arrangement contain a hidden biblical memory from his youth? No one knows. Yet the possibility remains tantalizing. Because throughout his letters, Vincent repeatedly connected the night sky with spiritual longing. In one remarkable passage, he wrote, "Why, I ask myself, shouldn't the shining dots of the sky be as accessible as the black dots on the map of France?" Think about that. For Vincent, stars were not merely objects, they were destinations, places, possibilities, perhaps even symbols of eternity. And then there is the towering cypress tree, the dark flame rising from the foreground. Most viewers see it simply as a tree, but in 19th century Europe, cypress trees carried a specific meaning. They were commonly associated with cemeteries and death. Yet here, the cypress does something unusual. It doesn't sink into the earth. It rises upward, connecting the village below with the stars above, like a bridge, like a ladder, like a pathway between worlds. The tree seems to unite earth and heaven, mortality and eternity, human life and the infinite cosmos. And once you see it that way, the entire painting changes. It is no longer a landscape. It becomes a meditation, a visual prayer, a question directed toward the universe itself. What lies beyond suffering? What lies beyond this life? What lies beyond the darkness?
And perhaps that is why
Starry Night continues to captivate millions of people more than a century later. Not because it depicts a night sky, but because it depicts something every human being experiences: wonder, hope, the longing for meaning, the feeling that there is something larger than ourselves hidden behind the visible world, a feeling Vincent understood deeply, even while struggling with despair, even while confined to an asylum, even while uncertain about his future. He painted a sky overflowing with light, and that may be the greatest mystery of all. How did a man living through such darkness create one of the most luminous visions in the history of art? Perhaps because Starry Night was never about the darkness. Perhaps it was always about the light. And perhaps that is the secret Vincent left for us to discover. But there is another mystery surrounding Starry Night. One that has nothing to do with astronomy, nothing to do with symbolism, nothing to do with hidden messages. It has to do with Vincent himself. Because what if I told you that the artist who painted one of the most beloved paintings in human history may not have thought it was very good? That possibility sounds almost impossible. Today, Starry Night hangs behind glass, protected like a sacred treasure, displayed on the 5th floor of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Millions travel from around the world just to stand in front of it for a few moments. It has appeared on posters, books, clothing, films, and coffee mugs. Its swirling sky is recognized by people who know almost nothing about art. Yet when Vincent painted it, he was uncertain, perhaps even dissatisfied. To understand why, we need to understand something crucial about Van Gogh. Despite the popular myth of the wild, impulsive genius, Vincent was extraordinarily serious about his craft. He studied perspective, he studied color theory, he studied anatomy, he studied the old masters relentlessly. He admired artists who worked directly from nature, artists who observed the world carefully and translated it honestly. For Vincent, truth mattered, and that is precisely why Starry Night troubled him. Because unlike many of his paintings, it was not painted directly from observation. Much of it came from imagination, memory, emotion, symbolism. And Vincent worried that this made it less authentic. In a letter to his brother Theo, he described certain imaginative works as potentially straying too far from reality. The irony is breathtaking. The very qualities that make Starry Night extraordinary today were the qualities that made Vincent doubt it. Think about that. The artist was criticizing the exact features that later generations would celebrate. The swirling heavens, the emotional intensity, the dreamlike atmosphere, the cosmic energy. What Vincent saw as a risk, history would see as genius. But at the time, history had not yet rendered its verdict. At the time, Vincent was simply a struggling painter, trying desperately to improve. And there was another reason for his uncertainty. Almost nobody was paying attention. When people hear the name Van Gogh, they imagine a famous artist. But Vincent was not famous. He was unknown. He sold virtually nothing. His finances were fragile, his future uncertain, his health unstable. And through it all stood one person, one man who never stopped believing in him, his brother Theo. It is impossible to tell the story of Vincent without telling the story of Theo. In many ways, Starry Night exists because Theo existed. Theo was more than a brother, more than a supporter, more than a patron. He was Vincent's lifeline. Month after month, year after year, Theo sent money, art supplies, encouragement, hope. While the world ignored Vincent, Theo paid attention. While critics dismissed him, Theo believed. While buyers walked away, Theo remained. Imagine what that must have meant. To receive letter after letter from the one person who still saw possibility when everyone else saw failure. The correspondence between the two brothers reveals something deeply moving. Vincent often worried that he was becoming a burden. He feared disappointing Theo. He feared that his struggles would exhaust the patience of the brother who supported him. Yet Theo never gave up. And because he never gave up, Vincent kept painting. The relationship between the two men may be one of the most beautiful examples of loyalty in art history. When people stand before Starry Night today, they see Vincent. But in a sense, they are also seeing Theo, because every brushstroke carries the invisible support of a brother who refused to let the artist quit. And then something remarkable happened. Long after Vincent's death, long after both brothers were gone, the world finally began to notice. The paintings survived. The letters survived. The vision survived. What had once seemed strange suddenly appeared revolutionary. What had seemed unfinished appeared modern. What had seemed excessive appeared brilliant. The very art that had struggled to find buyers became some of the most valuable art ever created. But perhaps the most astonishing twist was still to come. Because decades later, scientists would examine Starry Night and discover something that Vincent himself could never have imagined. Hidden within the swirling sky were patterns that appeared astonishingly similar to mathematical structures found throughout nature. Patterns associated with turbulence, complex flows of energy, the movement of fluids, the behavior of clouds, the dynamics of the universe itself. How could a struggling artist in 1889 intuitively paint patterns that scientists would only formally describe generations later? No one knows. Some call it a coincidence, others call it genius. But whatever the explanation, it adds another layer to the mystery. The painting seems to operate on multiple levels simultaneously: artistic, psychological, spiritual, even scientific. The deeper researchers look, the more questions emerge. And perhaps that is why Starry Night refuses to grow old. Most paintings eventually reveal their secrets. Starry Night does the opposite. Every decade uncovers new mysteries, new interpretations, new possibilities. The painting keeps expanding, as if the swirling sky still has stories left to tell. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: masterpieces do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive quietly. Sometimes they are doubted. Sometimes they are misunderstood. Sometimes even their creators fail to recognize what they have achieved. Vincent van Gogh never stood before crowds admiring Starry Night. He never witnessed its fame. He never saw the millions who would one day find comfort, wonder, and inspiration in its luminous sky. Yet somehow, despite all the suffering, despite all the uncertainty, despite all the reasons to stop, he painted it anyway. And that may be the most extraordinary thing about Starry Night. Not that it survived, not that it became famous, but that it was created at all. And now we arrive at the final mystery, not one hidden in paint or the stars, but in a human life. A question that can never be answered. Did Vincent van Gogh ever realize how close he was to changing art forever? In May of 1890, less than a year after painting Starry Night, Vincent left the asylum at Saint-Rémy. His condition had improved, and for the first time in months, there was reason for cautious optimism. He moved to the small village of Auvers-sur-Oise, north of Paris, where he came under the care of Dr. Paul Gachet, a physician known for his interest in artists. Something extraordinary happened during those final weeks. Vincent painted with astonishing intensity. Canvas after canvas emerged from his easel. Fields of wheat, country roads, gardens, houses, portraits, storm clouds, and sunlight. It was as if he sensed that time was running short. In just 70 days, he completed roughly 70 paintings, nearly one masterpiece every day. Despite years of disappointment, illness, financial uncertainty, and loneliness, he kept creating. Many artists spend their lives searching for their voice. Vincent had finally found his, and yet his future remained uncertain. A few encouraging signs had begun to appear. Critics were starting to notice his work, exhibitions were attracting attention, and fellow artists were recognizing his talent. For the first time, success no longer seemed impossible. It remained distant and fragile, but it was no longer unimaginable. And then, everything changed. On July 27, 1890, Vincent walked into a wheat field carrying a revolver. What happened next remains one of the most debated events in art history. The traditional account states that he shot himself in the chest, yet modern researchers have questioned aspects of that narrative and proposed alternative theories. The truth may never be known with certainty. What is known is that Vincent returned wounded. He survived for nearly 2 days, and during those final hours, one person came immediately to his side: Theo, just as he always had. For years, Theo had supported, encouraged, defended, and believed in his brother. Now, he sat beside Vincent's bed. The two men talked. No one knows every word that passed between them, but we do know Vincent's reported final statement, a sentence that has echoed through history: "The sadness will last forever." It is one of the most haunting lines ever attributed to an artist, yet perhaps Vincent was speaking about more than himself. Perhaps he was acknowledging something universal, that sorrow is part of the human condition, that every life contains suffering, and that no one escapes heartbreak. And yet, if sadness were the whole story, we would not still be talking about Vincent van Gogh, because, despite the sadness, he left something else behind. Beauty, wonder, light, hope. 2 days after Vincent died, Theo returned home, devastated. The loss shattered him, and his health rapidly declined. Just 6 months later, Theo himself died. The two brothers who had shared so much were now gone. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that Vincent's art might disappear with them. Imagine Starry Night vanishing into obscurity. Imagine the world never discovering sunflowers, the bedroom, irises, or wheat field with crows. Imagine art history without Van Gogh. That future came closer than most people realized. The paintings were not yet famous. The world had not yet embraced them. The responsibility for preserving Vincent's legacy fell to an unlikely figure, Theo's widow, Johanna van Gogh Bonga. And this is where the story takes an extraordinary turn. Johanna was not an art dealer, museum curator, or wealthy collector. She was a young widow raising a child. Yet she understood something others did not. She recognized the greatness of Vincent's work. She preserved the paintings and letters, organized exhibitions, and promoted the art tirelessly. Year after year, decade after decade, she persisted when others doubted and believed when others hesitated. Without Johanna, there is a very real possibility that Vincent van Gogh would not be known today. The paintings survived because she refused to let them disappear. The legacy of one of history's greatest artists ultimately depended on the faith of three people: Vincent, Theo, Johanna. One painted, one believed, one preserved. Together they changed the world, and eventually the world caught up. Slowly at first, then all at once. Museums began collecting the work, critics re-evaluated it, artists studied it, collectors sought it. The paintings that once struggled to find buyers became treasures, and Starry Night became one of the most beloved images ever created. But perhaps the greatest achievement of Starry Night is not artistic. It is human. Generation after generation, people continue to stand before it and feel something difficult to describe. A sense of awe, a sense of wonder, a sense that even in the darkest moments, there may still be light above us. Look again at the painting. The sleeping village, the dark cypress, the radiant moon, the stars burning across the heavens, the sky alive with movement. It is easy to see it as a masterpiece, but perhaps it is also a message from a man who spent much of his life wrestling with despair, loneliness, failure, and self-doubt. And yet he continued to search for beauty. Perhaps that is what the painting ultimately represents. Not certainty, not answers, but hope. Hope that there is meaning hidden within chaos. Hope that suffering is not the end of the story. Hope that even a troubled life can create something eternal. More than 130 years have passed since Vincent van Gogh stood before his canvas and painted those stars. The village remains silent. The cypress still reaches upward. The heavens still swirl, and millions of people still find themselves staring into that sky, asking the same questions Vincent once asked. Questions about beauty, questions about purpose, questions about eternity. Perhaps that is why Starry Night endures, because it is not merely a painting, it is a conversation, across time, across generations, between one searching soul and the rest of humanity. And somewhere within those swirling stars, Vincent's voice still whispers. Look closer. There is more here than you think. And maybe there always will be.